Have I had my apple today?
Yes.
I'm waiting for someone to bring a warm apple pie into the
Oh,
studio. I would
gosh.
take that with a little ice cream.
Oh, they're picky. Whatever, that sounds really, really good. But apples are the number one favorite fruit. You know, people talk a lot about bananas because they're really good for you. Well, apples are still the number one fruit, and they're really good for you too. How many years have people been eating apples? Well, 750,000 years is when we think the first apples were found in Kazakhstan in Central Asia, and botanists believe that this is the region where the original apples were found, and that all of our apples, of course, come from those original ones. Now, a little closer in time, in 1989, botanists visited Kazakhstan, and they found large stands of ancient apple trees. Well, they were only 300 years old compared to 750,000, but 300 years old, 50 feet tall, and bearing large red apples. And again, we believe this was the parent of all our domesticated apples, and actually it was a Russian botanist who really worked on that to make that all come to where we are now with all of our various varieties and delicious apples. Unfortunately, that botanist working on genetics it led to his imprisonment in the Stalin era, and he died in prison in 1943. So thank goodness, though, all of his work and information was passed on so that we got the apples in America. And the reason we have those is that the colonists found only 4 varieties of wild crab apples, but some of those smart colonists from France and Holland and Germany and England brought their seeds from their homelands, and it wasn't long before apple trees were the first growing in all of these rustic dwellings, and I'm sure they enjoyed them every fall, and they probably knew how to store them so that they could keep them through the winter also. As we said, America's number one fruit is the apple. Why? Well, first of all, they're pretty plentiful. I don't know if you've looked at the grocery store just lately. There are apples and apples and apples. And if you have any neighbors that have apple trees, you've probably found there was a pretty good crop of those also. They are delicious. They're versatile. They're portable. They're nutritious without very many calories. They are 85 to 95% water. So it's a good way to quench your thirst. You know, an easy thing to carry and quench your thirst. The acid content acts as a natural mouth freshener, and they are also believed to have some other healthful properties that we haven't mentioned here. So, what about apples? We talked about the genetics of apples, and of course there are new hybrids that are being developed. The newest ones in the last 10 to 15 years include Fuji, Braeburn, Gala, Pink Lady, and of course some people's all-time favorite, the Honeycrisp. And of course the breeders still continue to work on new varieties. But there is also an interest in the heirloom apples. So it's sort of an interesting turnaround of times. We are becoming more interested in heirlooms and know that it's important to hang on to those older varieties. More than 2,500 varieties of apples are grown at the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station, and one of the oldest agricultural research stations in the country. It's also the location for the United States Department of Agriculture's Plant Genetic Resources Unit, which houses the National Apple Collection. You know, somebody has to keep those, and that's true of other heirloom items also. We do need to keep those original varieties because we may need them in the future, and they are the basis for all of the new kinds of things that are being developed. Well, when you think about how you use apples, well, eating an apple in your hand, that's probably the simplest way. Apple pie probably is next, as Jim mentioned, or apple crisp. But they're not just for desserts. Think about chopping them up and using them in a bread stuffing. Think about them being sautéed with onions and added to perhaps cabbage and Polish sausage, or add them to a braised chicken recipe, or pork chops with apple slices. Think about them as being something you can use from the appetizers to the finishing dessert, everything in between. A couple of tips on buying apples. Of course, you want them to be firm to the touch and bruise free and not many blemishes. And because of that, of course, organic apples are one of the hardest things to grow because there are so many pests and so on. And of course, if you have an organic apple, you are going to have some blemishes, which does not, of course, affect the flavor. Overripe apples will feel soft and the texture will be mealy and mushy. But here's the interesting thing about the color, the background color. I think we usually think about the color that we see first, which is the outside color, but the background color, the darker green, the less ripe it will be. And that green usually, then as the apple ripens, changes to either a much lighter green or a yellow. Underripe apples are fine for cooking, but if you want to eat them out of hand, refrigerate them for a bit and they'll ripen. And by the way, refrigerating is the way to keep apples. It doesn't take long for an apple that sits out on the counter in a warm atmosphere to turn not so good. What about, Jim, when you make an apple pie, do you peel them? Do you peel your apples?
You think I make apple pie?
No, that's why you want somebody to bring you one.
I eat apple pie.
Yeah. Do you want the peelings off or on? Doesn't make any difference.
I've never dug in to take a look. I guess it doesn't make a difference to me because I don't think I'd know.
Well, for some people it does, and it kind of depends on what it is you're making. A lot of people do not peel apples for pie or for apple crisp or for perhaps a cake that has nuts and that sort of thing in it. But if you want something that's really fine textured, like a pudding or a really fine cake, you probably do want to take the peeling off. But that's kind of up to you. And, if you leave the peeling on, it has even more vitamins in it. So think about whether you want to leave that peeling on or not. Talked a little bit about storing apples. Remember that refrigeration is the best way to keep them. And if you expose them to warm temperatures, it's going to cause over-ripening and a mealy texture and a loss of flavor, none of which you want to have happen. What about, I always ask myself, all those kinds of apples there, which one am I going to pick out to do what? And I can never remember. But most people kind of have favorites. But I tell you what, in my credible source of information here on apples, it lists varieties and their best uses. Here's the easy thing. If you can't remember which apple is best for eating, salad, sauce, freezing, etc., choose a Braeburn. A Braeburn has an excellent rating for all uses. Now, some people want a Jonathan for apple pie, and that's a really good apple to select for pie, but a Jonathan is another one right behind Braeburn that's pretty much excellent for every use. And probably next on the list is the Jonagold, and that's a relatively newer variety, and it's pretty good for everything. And then finally, Winesap is rated excellent to good for all purposes. What about Granny Smith? Every recipe anymore calls for Granny Smith. Why is that? Well, it's probably because it's tart and it adds a different flavor. But Granny Smith actually is not rated that high for most purposes. Sometimes I make my decision about the apple to pick is the one that's the best price. And Granny Smith often is a higher priced apple. So what you might want to do is choose, if you're doing a recipe that wants a tart apple, just choose another variety that's a little underripe if you have that choice, and it will give you the same tartness and probably at lesser price. I know some people love the Granny Smiths just to eat out of hand because they really like that tart flavor. But all in all, as we said, apples are the number one favorite fruit. You can use it in lots of ways. And by the way, a quick way, if you want to make an apple crisp quickly, do it in the microwave And chop your apples up in a round casserole dish. Cook them a little bit before you put the topping on. And if you want to be really speedy with the topping, just top it with some mixed up granola, and a little bit of maple syrup would make it really yummy. And cook it for, till the apples are tender. You've got an apple crisp in just a few moments. Almost as good as apple pie, Jim, and especially when you add the ice cream on top. So, I'm not sure this is correct, but remember the saying that an apple a day keeps the doctor away.
Yeah, we're glad you could join us for today's edition of Backyard and Beyond with LaVon Eblin. You can hear it each weekday morning at 9:45 here on the station where your friends are. And if you missed today's episode or any of the episodes from prior days, you can check out KJAN.com, go to our contest and programs page, and that'll show you how you can get to our KJAN YouTube channel where you can check out some of those prior programs from LaVon.